And I say again, you need not be a Jew to be a Zionist.
Still with me in studio, Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Middle East editor at the Associated Press, and Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs analyst at the Jewish News Syndicate and the Miriam Institute. So Dan, let's pick your brain about what we just heard right now from the US leader. He looks strong, he looks well. When he came down off Air Force One, he put on his sunglasses. It is 31 degrees in Tel Aviv right now, but the message would have been music to the ears of that welcoming team, the Israeli leadership on the tarmac.
He spoke very warmly about being a Zionist, and he seemed effusive in his greeting of both Lapid and Bennett. And it probably doesn't hurt his own political prospects that he stood ramrod straight, was clearly taller than both of them by a head. And when he spoke, he had even comments that seemed extemporaneous, nonetheless did not devolve into a gaffe. So I think Biden's looking good.
Do you think his team is happy? Is the White House happy right now?
I think for the moment, the White House couldn't be more pleased.
What did you make of the fact that Naftali Bennett, alternate prime minister, was there on the tarmac as well?
Lapid is going to continue this attitude and approach of we, a collective cabinet, collective decision-making, working together with the ministries and not I. I think that was at least part of the attempt, and also, you know, perhaps returning a favor to an old friend.
No question. I would say
issue coming up, and so many other policy issues have just been pushed aside over this question, and I think that, you know, that is messaging. There is messaging here to the Israeli people that, you know, Lapid is going to continue this attitude and approach of we, a collective cabinet, collective decision-making, working together with the ministries and not I. I think that was at least part of the attempt, and also, you know, perhaps returning a favor to an old friend.
No question. I would say that the election is not just about whether you want Netanyahu in power, but whether you want Netanyahu and the style of governance that he represents, which is authoritarian, which is approaching a personality cult and so forth. That is why, indeed, I think the protocol issue is secondary, because I don't think there's necessarily a protocol about alternate prime ministers, which is an Israeli.
It's pretty new.
It's an Israeli invention, not like Iron Dome. I thought it was meant to project decency on everyone's part. That Lapid had him there. That Biden spent more time with Bennett than he did with Lapid. I noticed that, and he was very, very warm towards Bennett. Absolutely, it's meant to project a style of governance in Israel and America that's not just about the leader who's the be-all and end-all of an authoritarian establishment, but rather something more democratic. I don't think you have to be very cynical to see this as a case in which this is a campaign event for both leaders, Yair Lapid and Joe Biden, and they share more than that. They share a sort of brotherhood of the besieged. Both have been historically underestimated, and they're delighted to find themselves in the position for which they aspired all their lives. And they both face not just elections in November, but elections in which their side, not just the politicians, but their supporters, genuinely feel that something akin to democracy itself is at stake. There is a sense of desperation, and I think both want to use this visit to project leadership, to project gravitas on a world stage, and for Biden in particular, it's very, very important to show some wherewithal in the Middle East and in general as a foreign policy statesman. It is an area where Biden was supposed to be a big expert, given his senatorial past, and of course his numbers began to tank last August as a result of what was a shambolic exit from Afghanistan that just made America look ridiculous. And to quote a character from The Godfather, America cannot afford to look ridiculous.
With the midterms coming up, and he's not looking so strong on his feet in terms of his support.
Yeah, if he loses the House and the Senate, then his agenda is completely washed up. He got a big assist from the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade, enraging a solid majority of the American public. Polls have shown that that right away has evened out the race, whereas the Democrats were lagging far behind. Right now, the big thing is inflation. Minutes before we went on the air, it was announced the inflation figure for June year on year is 9.1%, the highest in over 40 years. Americans care a lot more about that than about whether he shakes or doesn't shake the hand of Mohammed bin Salman.
As the spotlight will turn to Saudi Arabia come Friday, and these Gulf nations +3 all meeting to discuss a whole range of issues that are likely to upset a lot of players as well. What do you make of that comment out of Dmitry Peskov?
I mean, Russia has every interest to see the world suffer economically because of the sanctions imposed on Russia as a result of its attack on Ukraine. That involves wheat, and it involves various forms of energy. The U.S., clearly, Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia is partly driven by desire to compel Saudi Arabia to do America's bidding as regards increasing the global oil supply. Russia has no interest in seeing that happen. They don't, and they're going to, if that happens, they're going to try to portray Saudi Arabia as the lackey of the United States. And it's no coincidence, I think, that the Iranian and Russian leaders are meeting shortly, and I believe Erdogan will be part of that as well. So we're seeing, as you say, something of an axis emerging between those anti-Western powers and a new alliance that could include Israel and Saudi Arabia in addition to other arguably moderate Sunni countries.
Timing of that meeting in Tehran is interesting, of course.
I think a lot hinges on the November election in Israel. Of course, it's true that they would like to move forward and be not in lockstep, but at least aligned with the UAE. Of course, it's true that they view the Iranian danger as more of an immediate concern than the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. That said, though, they seem to have difficulty actually crossing the Rubicon without some movement on Israel-Palestine. And that brings us to the situation in Israel. We have a government in Israel where, similarly, they have preferred some issues over others. The only reason Lapid is in power in Israel is because a certain proportion of the Israeli right has become fed up with the authoritarian and arguably undemocratic and supposedly corrupt nature of the previous Likud government. And so they abandoned it. They joined the left, and their price for joining the left was to freeze the Palestinian issue. So much as MBS may want to advance towards normalization with Israel, I am sure that Yair Lapid wants to advance towards rapprochement with the Palestinians, but he cannot. That may change. I'm not sure how likely that is, but if the center-left really does win the November election, and unlike a lot of observers in this country, I actually don't rule it out. If they win more decisively than last time, something might happen. If that happens to a sufficient degree that enables Lapid, or whoever is the prime minister after November, let's say it's Lapid, to actually move forward a little bit, that may, one of the factors there may be throwing a bone, in effect, to Saudi Arabia to justify their own crossing of the Rubicon as regards normalization.